Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching.
Julia was born in the middle of the war. The little girl didn't understand a thing. Her mother hid her every now and then. She could sleep in a dresser drawer, in a trunk, just so no one would touch her. Maria and John lived in a small town where the war as such did not reach. He went to the front, and Mary had to go to the local factory to work. "Oh, girls, how hard," lamented the woman when it was already 12th hour of work. "Yes, it's not easy for us," echoed her friend, wiping sweat from her forehead. Sometimes they didn't even go home after their shift because they were sorry for their feet and shoes. They just settled down on their sweatshirts in a corner and dozed off. "There seems to be a war on, nothing to eat, and you, why are you so thrashed?" asked Maria Betty. "I don't know myself. I'm heavy. I guess I've got some disease," the girl said with a puff of breath. "She's pregnant," Lucy laughed. "No, John has been gone 3 months," she said, thinking about it. "I'm sure you'll have a baby," said Lucy. Her friend knew a lot about these things. She had 3 children herself. "If that's so, it's good, but it's hard. You can't imagine how." Maria got up. She had to go to the bathroom. She waddled outside like a duck. They tried to do everything they had to do. The machine was high, so high that they had to put boxes underneath to reach it. No one spared the girls and women. They had to fulfill the norms. "Ah, girls, it's starting," Maria shouted. They were in a dirty and cold workshop this time too. Now, Lucy was running somewhere. She opened all the doors on the way, but there was nothing and no one there. She did this until she found a table that was more or less clean. "Thank you," was grateful to her girl. "You're welcome. Come back later for coupons for baby food," she told her just as strictly. All went to work further, and Maria needed to go home. But how to get there, she did not know. Lucy came to the rescue again. "You lie here for a while, and we will finish now, and by night, we will take you home," she said. The girl knew that the local watchman, old Jack, had a horse, and they would take it from him. "All right," Maria nodded. Betty went to get the coupons. Lucy made arrangements with Jack, and then, late in the afternoon, almost at night, they went to see Maria off. She lived in a nice house. Her parents still lived here. They'd gone to the country just before the war, and Maria had never heard from them again. "Oh, bruh." Betty shivered as they entered. There was wood in the yard, but not much. "That's all right. We'll float it tonight and keep it going," Lucy said. They did everything as it should be done. They heated water to wash first the baby and then the mother. "And where will she sleep?" "With you. You'll run her over, won't you?" "Nothing. I'll think of something." She smilingly looked at her daughter. When the friends left and Maria stayed in the house with her daughter, she took her in her arms and began to sing lullaby songs that her mother used to sing to her. "Everything will be all right," the girl said. She believed that the war would end. Maria looked that the firewood was burning out. She had to throw some more. She was afraid that from the bed the girl might fall, so she pulled out the drawer of the dresser and put her there. From then on, the girl had a sleeping place there. At the factory, they helped to put Julia in a nursery. How hard it was for Maria to part with her favorite little girl. The kindergarten was at the factory. She could visit her occasionally. But how can it be? Because no aunt will not replace the child's own mother, she lamented. "What can you do? It's just the way things are now." Lucy looked at her. So they continued to work. It was hard, but everyone tolerated it. Time passed. 3 years after John left home, he hadn't written a single letter. But lo and behold, Maria saw the mailman at the window. Her heart jumped. She looked at Julia, who was babbling something, thinking that things would soon get better. Maria ran out onto the porch. She could tell by the look on the mailman's face that nothing good was coming. No, she sat down, it was a funeral, or rather a message that her husband was missing. At that time, Almost every house had lost a husband, a son, a brother, so fate had reached her. "Maria, let's go to work." Lucy came to her. She saw that her friend was depressed. She had to cheer her up, to do something. The situation was getting better. The factory continued to work. There was food. Maria received coupons for children's food. "Listen, Julia, you have such a smart," said friends, Maria, when they came to visit her. "Yes, she is somehow on her own. The teacher helps." Maria agreed with them. When the radio reported about the victory, there was no limit to the joy. Everyone hugged and kissed, missing only those who never returned from the battlefield. "Don't be sad, Maria. Now the men will be back. We'll find you a father for Julia," Betty told her. Although she had lost no one during the war, and there was no one, she was also suffering and waiting for her love. Cities did not rebuild quickly. Although the war did not come to the town where Maria lived, but still, everything was in a miserable state. The factory blossomed before our eyes. The administrative building began to be repaired. The shops were also being renovated. "Girls, come to us tomorrow. Julia will go to the first grade." Maria called her friends to visit. "Oh, you won't believe it. I'd like to gather my own," said Lucy. "I'll be there," winked Betty at the girl. "Why are you so mysterious?" "I don't understand." "Yesterday at the Gathouse met a young man," she laughed, embarrassed. "Really?" And silent as a fish, work stopped for a while. If before, almost all women and girls made blanks for shells and other parts, now they've been transferred to the sewing shop. Of course, many stayed, but most of them were now sewing. "Nothing is clear yet," Betty blushed. "Will you bring to get acquainted?" Maria asked. And not only, the girl looked back so that no one could hear them. "He has a friend," said he would take him with him. "Oh, that's it, Maria, you're married." Lucy laughed loudly. "That's enough." She turned away and went on with her work. She sewed and thought about how she would present the man to Julia, what she would say to her. It was awkward and embarrassing. The next day, mother and daughter walked to school for the first time. Julia was smiling from ear to ear. She was so eager to get here that she talked her mother's ear off. "You're a schoolgirl." The woman sat down in front of her. All children were the same. If you looked from afar, you couldn't tell the difference. But no one cared at that time. They had to study, live, and build their own destiny. In the evening, the guests came. Betty, as promised, was not alone. "Hello, everyone." First, after the girl, entered a tall, blonde-haired young man. "Come in." Maria was a hospitable hostess. There were already treats on the table. There was not a lot of things, so she boiled potatoes and meat, which she bought at the market. "And we are not empty-handed," the guest replied. "Oh, why? You didn't have to." Maria began to feel embarrassed. "Meet Harry. This is Harry." Betty pointed at the guy next to her. "And this is Evan." He pulled something out of his pocket wrapped in newspaper and handed it to the girl. "Thank you." She grabbed it and ran. "You're like you've never seen presents before." Her mother laughed at her. Maria realized that Harry was with her friend, which meant Evan had come to see her. It became even more uncomfortable. Everyone settled around the table. Conversations began. "Girls, why don't we go dancing this weekend?" Harry even stood up. "What are you talking about? Where would I go with a baby?" Maria blushed. "What's the big deal? There's live music in the park, a bandstand," Betty said. "Well, we've got to get through the weekend," Maria said. "Come on, Julia, come here," the young man called the girl. Julia came to the table. She stood in her faded dress and looked at it. Evan sat the little girl on his lap. She smiled. "Never has she seen a man in our house," Maria told him. "Well, and now the master will be in the house. Everything will get better," he said loudly and gave the girl a cockerel. She squealed with joy, jumped off his lap, and went back to her toys. "You'll spoil her like that." She wagged her finger at him. "Now she'll expect sweets from you every time," Maria said. Maria looked at him. She liked him, statuesque, handsome. But, as if everything is fast, what people will say, neighbors. Did anyone ask me? She was watching Evan from the sidelines. Why, you're free, I'm free too. There's nothing in the way. He looked at Betty and Harry. Yeah, and we're in favor of it too. The girl nodded her head. We'll live, we'll get to know each other, and then we can get married. What about you, Maria? Evan plucked up his courage and moved closer to her. Oh, come on, she waved everyone away. The evening went on, it was boring. How about a small one? Harry asked quietly. Where can I get some? Betty looked at him. I've got it all with me. He pulled a bottle out of his pocket. Maria, bring the shots, her friend commanded. The liquor made me feel good. Why don't we sing? Evan suggested it. Let's do it, Betty encouraged him. At the table, the song dragged on. Julia sat in the corner, licked the cockerel, and plugged her ears. It was unpleasant for her. The talk went on and on. After the pouring, the revelations began. Betty looked at Vazia so much that it was obvious to the naked eye that it was love. They parted late when it was dark outside. Don't forget about the dance, Evan reminded Maria as they stood at the gate. I'll forget with you. She was embarrassed in front of him. I'll be there, he promised and followed the others. The woman returned home. First she cleared the table, then she unmade the bed and lay down. Mommy, can I come over? Her daughter asked her. Of course, threw back the blanket. Julia climbed under Maria's warm side, snuggled against her. Tell a story, the girl asked. And her mother began to tell her about a little girl who grew into a flower. So they fell asleep. Maria didn't even have time to think about Evan. In the morning, Julia took her briefcase. Her mother walked her a little and ran to work. She was very surprised when she met Evan on the way. Hi, we're late, she told him and didn't even stop. We won't be late, he caught up with her, and now they were walking side by side. They entered the factory together. The janitor looked at them and smirked into his mustache. There used to be almost only women here, and now a lot of young couples started to form. It was good. So, how was the matchmaking? Lucy was interested. It was all right, wasn't it, Maria? Betty looked at her. Yes, she kept her mind on her work. I saw your fiancé today, her friend laughed. What do you think of him? Maria stopped work. He's a good-looking man, Lucy mocked him. Are you coming to the dance with us this weekend? Betty came up to her. Oh, you there solve your amorous affairs, and I do not have time for it, sighed the woman. All right, Maria and I will go. The girl went back to work. Julia, I'll leave Julia at your place, shyly, but asked Maria. Of course, what a conversation. After that, everyone was silent and continued sewing. In the evening, Evan was already waiting for her at the gatehouse. She saw him before she even left the building. Are you following me? Maria asked. I just liked you, so I thought I'd see you off. He walked beside her. Come in, I'll give you tea, the landlady called him when they came to her house. And I'll feed you and put you to bed, he joked. It was still early. She was blushing again, but he could not see it because he was walking behind her. Julia was already home. She heard her mother coming in and ran towards her. Hello, Julia. The man picked her up in his arms. Will you be our daddy? She asked him. If your mother doesn't refuse, I will. He glanced at the woman. They sat down at the table. Maria poured tea for everyone, and Evan took out lambs. Help yourselves, he said. It was a family affair, and in the evening, Evan suggested they go for a little walk. Julia, I'll be back soon, her mother promised her. Okay, she nodded obediently. The girl was sitting at the table, scribbling away in a notebook. Let's live together. Evan asked her outside the gate. Let some time pass. People would misunderstand. She didn't want to rush things. Okay, we'll wait, he elbowed her. They walked down the street. Then Evan walked her home, bowed and left. Oh, you're here again. Maria saw the girl lying in her bed. May I? Asked her daughter. Of course, smiled the mother. On the weekend, Maria took out her only dress, put on beads, painted her lips, and went outside. It was a surprise that Evan wasn't there. He'd been here at the gate day and night the last few days. She walked to the park by herself. Music could be heard. "Hello," someone touched her shoulder. She turned and saw him, standing there with a bundle in his hands. Scared her, she laughed. "This is for you." He handed her the gift while he was standing in line. "I was late for you." "Thank you." She looked at the package and didn't know whether to unwrap it now or later. "I'll look at it at home." "Let's go, or we'll miss the whole thing." He took her hand. Bethy and Harry were already there. They were dancing. Evan picked Maria up by the waist, and they went to the dance floor as well. "And Harry asked me to marry him," Betty said cheerfully to her friend. "Well and good. Oh, we'll dance at the wedding," Maria said cheerfully. "Didn't he ask you?" Betty looked at Evan. "Go on, what's the hurry? I need a man in the house, but not at this rate." The girls laughed. "What are you two talking about?" Harry interrupted their conversation. Evan came over. "Not about you. You're dreaming." Betty turned to her boyfriend. "Oh, not us? What else is there to talk about?" He dragged her off to dance. "Surely not about us." The young man watched as his friend's cheeks flushed. "Right, about us." She turned around and went dancing too. Evan watched her. He realized how much hardship these weak girls had to go through. But they had gotten through it all. And now they were dancing happily here. A week later, Evan moved in with Maria. He had a house too, but not as big. So it was decided to stay here. "We have to sign the papers," Maria told him. "Everything will be fine," he winked at her. From then on, Maria had a new husband and Julia had a father. He fixed everything in their house. With his own hands, he had made a floorboard, a desk, a nightstand, and shelves. Now the girl had a place where she could do her homework and put her books. Everything used to be on the table in the kitchen. "I'm going to grow up and be the most famous," Julia said. She was 10 years old at the time. "You'll grow up and we'll see," Evan laughed back. Julia studied well. She absorbed everything like a sponge. When she came home, she would tell her parents what they had learned. She was an agile girl who wanted to know everything. "Oh, Julia, you'll learn a lot." Her mother stroked her on the head. She wanted to be an artist. She dreamed of going on stage and singing and dancing. That's what she told her mom and dad about. She and Evan wanted a little one, but it didn't work out. The man was upset about it, but could not do anything. The family started arguing and fighting. One day, he didn't even come home for the night. So it got away. Maria said to him the next day, "I'm not going anywhere." He stood in the doorway. "I have a wife and daughter here." "I guess you didn't remember that yesterday." She was very upset with him. Julia watched the whole thing. She was not a little girl. She understood everything. The girl had finished 8 years of school. She had to decide to think about a career as an artist. Yes, she liked it all, but she wanted something else. Let songs and dances remain as a hobby. "Mom, when I leave, what will you do without me?" she asked the woman. "Oh, you'd think so. You'd think so," she shook her head. "Well, why? It will be for a long time. Will I find a husband there and stay?" She looked flirtatiously at Maria. But try. Her mother wished her only happiness, a big female. The girl was preparing for her exams. She knew that she would succeed, but she was still worried. "Mom, will we make a dress or buy one?" asked her daughter. "Of course, sir. No one will have such a style, only you," said the seamstress with many years of experience. "I knew that you are the best mom in the world," upped her girl. They bought the fabric from which the dress was to be made, and Maria set to work. It turned out really very beautiful and fashionable. "Well, who doubted the mother?" she said when the daughter twirled at the mirror. "No one ever doubted you." She kissed her on the cheek. "That's it. The daughter is ready for adulthood." The woman stood and almost cried. "No need, I'm not dying. I'm just graduating from school," hugged her daughter. It was necessary to have a good sleep. Tomorrow is a very important day for everyone. So Maria fed everyone dinner early, and by 9 o'clock everyone was in bed. "Julia, congratulations on your graduation." The principal handed her the certificate. "Thank you." She was happy and knew exactly what she was going to do next. "Are you sure?" Her father and mother stood over her as she packed her things. Sure, Julia was applying to an institute that was in a big city. "Come on, do not break wood there. Do not bring in the hem, first study, and then everything else," her mother admonished her. "Mom, I'm a big girl, and I understand what is good and bad." Julia did not want to offend her mother, but these admonitions irritated her. The ticket was already bought. She came to the station, sat on the train, waved to her mother, and went to her adult life. There were no problems with enrollment, because the girl had been preparing for it for a very long time. Dormitory was provided, so there were no problems with housing. "Hello, girls." She entered the room where she was going to live for several years. "Are you going to live with us too?" They smiled back. "Yes. If you don't mind." She stopped near the door and looked to see which bed would get her. "My name is Maddie," one of the girls told her, and pointed to a bed where she could put her things. "And I'm Julia." She began to sort through her bags. "Oh, how many delicious things you brought." The girls looked at the jars of different sizes. "Yes, my mom put on the road. She's like that." Julia put everything under the table so that later you can get and eat. The girls were unpacking their things. They wanted the room to be cozy and comfortable. One was hanging curtains, the other was laying mats. "Where do you cook?" Julia looked at Maddie. "In the kitchen," she laughed. The school started. Everything was normal, just like at school. Julia became an activist in the group. She liked everything. She wanted to participate in everything. Her teachers praised and loved her because she did well in her studies and in everything else. "Hills, let's go to the dance," the guys who studied at the same institute said to them. "No dancing, we have fun here." Julia smiled back at them. "Shall we get acquainted?" One of them asked her. "Why should I get to know you?" "I know you are Anthony from the parallel group," she told him. "How do you know me?" He didn't understand. "And how not to know you? At every meeting they talk about you." Julia wagged her finger at him. "Oh, you're the one everyone praises," he remembered. "Why is it that if a person is eager to study and does everything well, he can be insulted for that?" She didn't understand. "Okay, sorry," he tilted his head. "No, you explain it to me." She stood in front of him. "Everyone is talking about you. In the dorm you're watching everyone, in the institute you're watching everyone. You can't get away from you," the guy began to explain. "So, and nowhere, if everyone did everything right, and I would not interfere anywhere," she answered him. "So, you're not going to the dance?" he asked for the last time. "Yes, I am," she posed. Julia thought that if they say that about her, then she can show that not only at school can behave properly. "Let's go," he wouldn't back down. "Girls, let's go to the dance, shall we?" She looked into her room. "Julia, you've never been out, have you?" They were surprised. "But tonight I will," she said firmly. The whole bunch of them rolled out into the street. There was no need to go far, because the city garden was opposite their dormitory. "Shall we dance?" Anthony came up to her. "I don't dance with people like you." She turned away from him. She wanted him to persuade her. "What are you doing?" He was still standing next to her. "And nothing, you won't insult." She stood proudly with her back to him like that. "Fine, stay here by yourself." He went to the guys. Julia stood there for a few more seconds with her back turned, wondering if he would stand his ground or come over again. But Anthony was proud too. Now he was standing there talking to his friends. Julia was so taken with this young man that she couldn't help but think of him. Why had he left then? Why hadn't he insisted she dance with him? She always got her way and people gave into it. This one just turned around and walked away and didn't even look in her direction. The dance was over and the girls left for the dorm. "Julia, why are you so sad?" Maddie came up to her. Say, do you know Anthony from the parallel group? She asked her. Of course. We went dancing with them recently, smiled Maddie. Say, how can you be like that? Julia couldn't find words. Like what? Her roommate didn't understand. Like what? Like what? Like this? The girl jumped off her bed and left the room. Are you out of your mind? Maddie said after her. And in Julia's mind, there was only one thing. She wanted only one thing now, to get Anthony's attention, and then to tell him what she thought. But how to do it? To approach him herself, pride did not allow, and he would hardly come to her again. It turned out that Julia's whole group was going camping. As long as the days were sunny, they had to get everything done. Julia, are you coming? Maddie ran in, out of breath. Sure, I'm packed. She pointed to her backpack. Now I'll leave something too. The girl was in a hurry. The bus wouldn't wait. They had to get to the woods, and then they'd be on their own. It was not their first hike, so the girls really wanted to get there, because it was so much fun. The guys sang songs around the campfire, the girls cooked. And then everyone enjoyed delicious and hot porridge and soup together. They made it in time, climbed inside the cabin. Almost everyone was already there. What is he doing here? Julia asked her friend. Who? She didn't understand and began to look where Julia was looking. Anthony, she made big eyes. Anthony, you don't need him, the girl said. They invited everyone. He must have volunteered. Okay, why are you so angry? Julia thought it was better to sit down and calm down, so as not to attract attention. They set off, and were there in an hour and a half. Wow, we've come a long way this time, Zoika said. It's okay, it's even more interesting. Julia started to get off the bus. They reached the place where they had to set up camp quickly. They began to do their own things. Is there a river nearby? One of the girls asked. You can probably hear it babbling. Maddie pointed in the direction. Don't go in there, it's a swift current, Anthony shouted. Yeah, like you know everything around here, Julia said under her breath. What are you whispering? Her neighbor asked her. Just talking to myself, she laughed. After everything was ready, the boys scattered, some to see if there were mushrooms or not. Others gathered branches for the fire, and others just admired the beauty of the forest. Shall we go to the river? Julia called her friend. Let's go. But you remember it's dangerous out there. Maddie glared at her. Yeah, very dangerous, she smiled slyly. Don't say that you decided to swim. It's cold outside, and I won't save you. If anything, the girl warned her friend. Do not carp. Julia made her way forward through the bushes. In front of them opened such a beauty that even took the breath away. Zoika, look how beautiful it is here. Julia squeezed her eyes shut. Let's go to the water. They began to descend. Of course, Julia wasn't going to swim, and she didn't have a swimsuit with her. But fate is unpredictable. Her foot slipped on a rock, and she went tumbling down. Julia, echoed across the river, shouted Maddie. She plunged into the water, and the current picked her up and carried her. Help me, she screamed once. Maddie saw Anthony running toward them with great strides over all the obstacles. He was not frightened and dived in. A couple minutes later, he was dragging Julia out of the water. Were you following us? She coughed. No thanks to her, but she's being rude. I told you it was dangerous, but no, let's go anyway. He turned and went upstairs. Oh my God, you're soaking wet. Maddie sat down next to her friend. I'm refreshed, she laughed. She looked back at where the guy had just gone. Why did you do that to him? What did he do to you? Maddie asked her. I don't know, not yet, I repent. But when I do, I get so angry, the girl confessed honestly. They went. Now, the gym teacher came up to them. He was a chaperone on this trip. It will hurt a little. She waited for some kind of click, but when it became incredibly painful, she realized that everything was in place, because afterwards it became immediately easy. In the evening, as everyone expected, there was a bonfire and songs around it, and the next day, it was necessary to pack for the return trip. "It's a pity there's so little time," Maddie said. "Yes, we didn't even get to enjoy the romance to the fullest," her friend agreed. "I think you've had enough of that," she laughed. They loaded into the bus again. After a rich vacation in nature, everyone fell asleep quickly. The girl stood on her floor near the window and thought, "What are you thinking about?" She heard his voice from behind. She would have recognized him out of 1,000. "Anthony, hello." She turned around. "I wanted to talk to you, but I didn't know how to approach." "Speak. Here I am, standing in front of you," the guy answered her simply. "Look, I'm sorry for the antics that pushed you away," she said. "It was very hard for her to do it." "Forget it. I didn't even pay attention. It's no big deal." He looked around at the girls running down the hall. "You know, I wanted to offer you to study together, to make you better in your studies. I didn't know what excuse Julia could find to be with him." "Why, we could," Anthony shrugged. He wasn't averse to making friends with Julia himself. "We'll meet tomorrow at the library," she said, though she hadn't expected him to agree so quickly. The library, he muttered and walked down the hall. They began to study, and Anthony was getting good at it. He was capable. "Why, in class, are you pretending?" She couldn't understand why he knew everything here and not in class. "Why, you just explain things so well." He looked her in the eye. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Julia was embarrassed. "Friendship." He held out his hand. Good. For some reason, Julia didn't hold a grudge against him at that moment. They began to meet often in that very library. She helped him write term papers and essays. He amused her. They went to the movies, but they were not dating yet. They had already finished their 3rd year of study. They had become friends. They couldn't be separated by water. That day they went to a movie. There was a comedy, and the guy invited the girl. Afterwards, they went out, reminisced, and discussed the moments of the movie. "You know, you're beautiful," the guy said to her. "What are you talking about?" She laughed gleefully. "The truth." He walked over to her and pressed her against the wall. "Anthony, let go." She started to pull away. "I won't let go. I'll hold you like this for the rest of your life." His face was very close. "Fool, you're hurting me." She was still trying to pull away. Me too, just here." He pointed to where his heart was. "What?" She froze and looked at him. Though he kissed her and immediately let her go, thinking he was about to run away. But Julia stood and looked at the young man. "What did you just do?" She even stomped her foot. "I love you. We've been friends for 2 years, and you don't realize it." He didn't turn around. He stood against the wall. "I love you," she laughed. "Julia, we're two fools." He hugged her. "You're the fool for not admitting it sooner." "I couldn't. I'm a girl." She rolled her eyes. They had already returned to the dorm as a couple. "Maddie, Anthony, and I aren't friends anymore," Julia whispered to her friend at night. "What do you mean? You were always together." She even sat up in bed. "He confessed today that he loves me." Julia blushed. She could feel it. The room was dark. "Well, friend, I congratulate you." Maddie lay back down. "I congratulate myself," closed her eyes and smiled at the girl. After that day, the young people did not part. Anthony spent the whole day in the girls' room. Or they'd go out after couples and kiss. It got to the point where the superintendent called them in. "Julia, what's going on?" She looked at her sternly. "I've always had confidence in you." "Nothing." The girl was very embarrassed to be sitting here. "Is there love between you two?" She pointed at her and Anthony. "Yes," nodded Julia. "Stop showing it to the whole dormitory. You are adults, apply, get married. I will give you a separate room," she concluded. "Why?" The young man wanted to say something, but Julia stepped on his foot so painfully that he squeezed his eyes shut. The couple left the office, both silent. Why did you step on my foot so painfully? He asked and wrinkled his nose. What did you want to say to her? The girl was indignant. Not to her, but to you, he clarified. Me? She turned to him. Yes, why don't we really apply? It's only a year away from the end of school, so we'll do everything together. He really wanted to do that. Okay, we just have to go to my parents first, she thought. I agree. Anthony had been to Julia's house before, so it was nothing new to him. Now, on the weekend, and let's do it. They went room by room. Maria waited for her daughter always. She missed her so much that everything was falling apart. And we're here to visit you. Anthony and Julia entered the house. Oh my God, my daughter. Her mom hugged her. Where's Dad? She asked. I don't know, he's out again, the woman began to mutter. She seated the guests at the table, poured tea, took out cookies and candy. We didn't come for nothing, Anthony said, smiling. You say, Maria, although she instructed her daughter that first study and then everything else, but she wanted her and Anthony to be together. Anthony proposed to me, Julia blurted out. That's news. Evan appeared in the doorway. What's the big deal? We have nothing left, and they give us a dorm room, the guy said. Everything is fine, but why without me? The man said good-naturedly. He came up, shook the young man's hand, and hugged his daughter. Well, so how are you? Julia looked at her parents. Where are you going to get married? Evan asked. We didn't want any wedding. We'll just go to the registry office and get married. That's all, Anthony said, as if under his breath. No, that wouldn't do. Our family was used to celebrating holidays. Evan slapped the table and went to the stove. All right, then we'll sign and come here, and we'll set the tables here. The young men agreed with him. When they returned to town, they did as they wanted. First they applied, they had to wait for a short time. And when they received the certificate, they immediately took it to the commandant. That's a different story, she said, and gave them the keys to their room. Thank you, Julia smiled. As promised, they went to Maria's parents' house. Anthony didn't have a dad or mom by then. Maria and Evan had set the table so full of hors d'oeuvres. Where did all this come from? Julia didn't understand. A secret. Her mother put her finger to her lips. Everyone Julia had known since she was a child had come. The young people were congratulated, given gifts. They thought they were the happiest couple on the planet. Do you want to do it together or separately? Maria asked them, smiling. Mom, Julia was ashamed to talk about it, even though she was already married. Mom, what? She mocked her. We'll sleep in separate rooms, she agreed. That's fine, and you will lie with me tonight, as then, in childhood, remembered Maria, and tears came to her eyes. Julia came up to her. She loved her mother very much, because she did everything, so that her daughter could be like that, like she is now. In the evening, Evan settled down by the stove, and his mother, as she had done long ago, threw back the blanket and looked at Julia. May I? The girl asked. Go already, the woman smiled. Julia climbed into her mother. She pressed herself against her body. It was so nice to remember how it was. And the story? Julia started to beg, like when she was a child. Okay, listen. And she started the girl's favorite fairy tale about the little flower girl. Mommy, Julia snuggled up to her, I love you so much. And she said, I will leave, I will find. What will you do without me? The woman finished telling the fairy tale and teased her daughter. You see, when everything is near, you do not realize the value of it. But as soon as you are at a distance, you realize what you really lack. You say all the right things, but each person has his own destiny, sighed Maria. You've lost a lot of people in your life. The girl tried to look her in the face. You have no idea how hard it is. It seemed that Mom began to cry. Where are your parents? You never told me about them. Julia asked. When your father John and I lived together before the war, they went to the village. I didn't even say goodbye to them then, and my father said I shouldn't wait for them because they would be here soon, but they never came back, and I don't know anything more about them." Julia felt her mother crying now. They lay and talked for a long time. Julia realized that there was so much she didn't know about her own mother. She wouldn't tell, and Julia wouldn't ask. And so it was that part of the family's history had been left out in the open. They fell asleep only in the morning, and then the rooster crowed. They had to get up and get ready. And the guests were coming again. "Shall we flood the bathhouse?" Evan asked. "Sure," Anthony agreed. There weren't many people there today, so everyone behaved as if they were at home with their own people. In the evening, everyone was so tired after the bath and the guests that they went to bed. "Well, now we are going home." Julia said goodbye to her parents the next morning. "Happiness to you," the woman cried. Study went faster. There was so much to do, but there was no time at all. The young people tried to do everything right so that there would be no complaints against them. And when Julia and Anthony received their diplomas, they were very happy about it. "Well, my dears, you can no longer live in the dormitory," the commandant came to them. "At least until the end of the summer," the girl asked her. "All right," she agreed. "We had to find something somewhere, but we were on a deadline." "Julia, I have good news." Anthony came home in August. "Speak quickly," his wife asked him. "I was hired to work at the factory. Now we will have a dormitory," he hugged her. The housing issue was solved, but Julia could not find a job. She was offered a job in a small town, but she refused. Now she was also attracted to the place where her husband worked. And nevertheless, after a few months, she smiled with luck. She also joined the ranks of the factory workers. Everything seemed to be going well in her life. "Julia, why don't we have children?" Anthony asked her. "Wait, let's get an apartment, and then we will think about children," she replied. In fact, the girl was afraid. She thought that a child would be born and take away everything from her job, her life in the team. No matter how much her husband persuaded her, she did not agree. Then Anthony thought that if the pregnancy came, Julia would never take a break. Time passed. Husband and wife worked. After a few years, they got their long-awaited apartment. Oh, Julia woke up in the morning. "What?" Anthony jumped up. Now she jumped up and ran somewhere. But when Anthony heard the distinctive sounds, he lay down and relaxed. It was about time. "Are you pregnant?" he asked his wife when she came back. "I don't know. I guess," she sat on the bed, pale. "Go to the doctor today," the husband insisted. "Okay, don't talk so loud. I have a headache," she asked him. Julia excused herself from work and sat in the hallway in front of the doctor's door after lunch. She was almost 30 years old. It seemed time to give birth, but she was afraid. "Come in," appeared to be the third time the nurse had invited her in, but Julia didn't hear it. She came in, sat down in front of the doctor. "Why are you so late?" the first time. He looked at her chart. "Doctor, do an examination, and that's it," she asked him. Everything was confirmed. Julia was indeed pregnant. This news in the evening pleased her husband very much. "Now we will have a real family, and then we will make a second one," he hugged Julia. "This would be born, and he is already thinking about the second," she grinned. "If you give birth, nothing will happen to you." He almost danced around the apartment. Strangely enough, the pregnancy went very easily. Julia did everything she'd done before. She thought she'd be lying down. When it was necessary to go on maternity leave, did not want to leave anything and no one, she cried crocodile tears. It was like she had a premonition she wasn't coming back here. Anthony continued to work, and Julia was preparing for the most important day of her life. She kept checking her bag to see if she had forgotten anything, reading books about pregnancy and childbirth. She even decided to go to her mom's to ask her how it was going. "Julia, come in. Why did you go so far away?" Her mother was afraid for her health. "Nothing. There's still so much time ahead," she said. "No traveling. Stay with us. You'll give birth here." Her mother was worried. "Everything will be fine, but I'll go to my husband to give birth." The daughter stood her ground. "Mom, tell me, how does it hurt?" "Julia asked me at dinner tonight." "Oh, you know how I gave birth to you." She sat across from me and smiled. "I was a baby then. I don't remember much," my daughter admitted. "What's there to remember?" On the factory table, covered by a curtain, Lucy and Bethy were helping, Maria said. "Yes, it must have been hard," Julia sighed. "Why are you sighing? Is it bad?" Her mother jumped up. "No, I'm fine. I'm just worried." She sipped some water and sat back down. "So, we're not making anything up. You're staying with us, period." Her mother was adamant. But a couple of days later, Anthony showed up for his wife. He asked a friend, who had a car, to go together to pick up Julia. "You see, Mom, how I am loved. Now we are waiting for you to visit." She said goodbye to her parents, and she and her husband drove home. As the time approached, the excitement grew stronger and stronger, and 2 weeks before her due date, Julia was admitted to the hospital. What did the doctor say? Anthony was worried. At home, while she was telling her husband, she realized that she couldn't sit alone. She had all kinds of thoughts in her head. She got so nervous, she passed out. Turns out it was the pressure. "That's it. I'm here for the long haul," she smiled. "As long as the baby's okay," Anthony said. And Julia stayed in the hospital. She followed all the doctor's orders, mostly IVs and pills. Now, as she lay in the room with several other women who had already had babies, they talked a lot. "Did it hurt to give birth?" she asked them. "It's different for everyone," answered the most experienced one. "For some reason, I'm so afraid of this day," Julia said. "Don't be afraid of anything. Listen to the midwife and to everything she tells you," the woman said. "Yes, I've read about that too," Julia nodded. During the night, a pregnant woman became ill, screaming and squirming on the bed. "What's wrong with her?" The girl woke up from the screams. "It has begun," answered the one she had talked to during the day. "We need to call a doctor." Julia got up and went out into the hallway. The nurses came running in at once, taking the woman to the delivery room. "God, how much is she screaming? Does it really hurt that much?" Julia stood by the door. She couldn't sleep. "Imagine that the pelvic bones have to move apart for the baby to come out," her roommate told her. "Oh, I can't wait for that day to come. I can't. I think about it every hour," she said. The next day, she saw the same woman who had been sick during the night. She was sitting quietly in the dining room eating breakfast. "Where's your baby?" she asked her. "They took it away. They will bring it soon for feeding," she answered. "And now you are not in pain?" Julia asked her. "It hurts only when everything happens, and now it's over," the woman said calmly. After that, Julia calmed down a little. Now she really saw the situation from the outside and began to set herself up for a positive moment. "You do not think that everyone has this quickly," said her neighbor in the ward. "Why?" The girl didn't understand. "One will be brought in a couple of hours, and the child is already with her, and the other 8 hours of labor, not intimidating, but warmed the woman." A week passed after she was admitted to the hospital. In the evening, Julia's lower abdomen began to pull. She looked at her roommate in horror. "It's starting," she said. Julia didn't wait and went straight to the nurse. She was given an enema and taken to the prenatal ward. Whatever she did that night, there was a pain that words cannot describe. But Julia didn't scream. Yes, she moaned, but she didn't want anyone to hear her. She didn't want to scare anyone, like the laboring woman in her room. In fact, she watched and listened to everything the doctor told her. At one point, it hurt so much that she thought she was going to pass out, and then it went away. "Congratulations, you have a boy," the woman told her. Julia cried. She realized that she had been more afraid of this day than she had actually been. The baby's cries echoed throughout the room, and it couldn't help but make her happy. Already in the morning outside the maternity ward was Anthony. He was just not jumping for joy. First of all, a firstborn, and secondly, a son. He asked his wife to show his son, but on the second floor there was nothing to see but a blanket. "Congratulations and love," he shouted to Julia, and she stood looking at him and smiling. It was happiness for her too. She realized that she had been afraid and thought about it for nothing. Everything had gone just fine. But now she had a lump of happiness in her arms that she had created herself. Julia and Sam were quickly discharged from the hospital. At home, everything was ready. Anthony had done his best. He had bought balloons, inflated them, and now they were lying on the floor in the apartment. He bought a crib, which was also covered with beautiful vapors. In a vase were flowers for his beloved. He purposely did not take them to the maternity hospital so as not to wrinkle them. Not much time passed, and Julia realized that she was bored sitting at home. But since her son was small, she had nothing else to do. She wanted her mother to come over to her house to unwind by talking to her. "Mommy," she opened the door. Evan and Maria were standing on the doorstep. "We came to visit you to see our grandson. We brought some presents," the woman told her. "How I was waiting for you," she hugged the most dear people. "We had been planning to come for a long time, but we thought we would disturb you," Maria confessed. "What are you saying? You will never interfere with us?" Her daughter looked at her sternly. They all went into the room together. The grandparents couldn't get enough of their grandson. They took him in their arms, hummed and turned him over in different ways. Julia was even afraid at one point that they might drop him. "How long are you staying?" her daughter asked her. "We just got here and you're already asking," Evan laughed. "Come on, I'm just saying." Julia had changed. She's more serious, more responsible. She was like that before, but now she's more feminine. "Julia, if anything goes wrong, you can always count on us," her mother told her before she left. What could be wrong? She wondered. "I can see that you are bored. If you decide to go to work, be sure that you can leave the child with us." She didn't want him to be put in a nursery as young as she had given her daughter. "Okay, thanks, Mom." She kissed her and closed the door behind them. It was like the mother was looking at water. When Sam was 8 months old, Julia was going to go to work. But as it turned out, her position at the factory was downsized. "So, where do I go now?" she asked her boss. "Sit tight, be patient. Things might still get better," she said. "How will it get better? You have to take me." Julia insisted. "I told you, there is no position. I can't fire other people." The woman began to talk to her in the same tone of voice. Julia was not that kind of person. She was not going to sit around and wait. She wrote her resignation letter, went back home, and waited for her husband. In her mind, a plan was brewing that would solve everything. "Anthony, I need to talk to you," she told him. "You're so serious," he marveled. When Sam fell asleep, they sat down in the kitchen. Julia poured tea. She seemed hesitant to start a conversation. "What's wrong?" Her husband was getting worried because he didn't know what to expect from this conversation. "I want to leave this town," she said. "What's wrong with this place?" "If they didn't hire you, then wait, you are still on maternity leave. They will hire you. They have no right to fire you," he said. "I wrote a letter of resignation myself," she admitted to him. "What? And where are you going to go?" He stood up and walked over to her. "Let's go back to my mom's place where I've always lived. I'll get a job at our factory there. I think they'll take you too," she told him. "Okay," he agreed right away. "Really, you agree? And I was afraid to start a conversation with you. I thought you would talk about your position, about your job." She was happy. Not a few months later, Julia and Anthony left for the hometown where the girl was born. "Well, in close quarters, but not in a fence," said the mother when her daughter told her that they came to live with them. The woman was unspeakably glad that now all the children would be here with her. If there was some other little house, she wouldn't mind moving there, as long as they were happy. "Settle down wherever you like. Don't think about us at all, she told her daughter and son-in-law. No, you don't think. I'll get a job now, and they will give us an apartment, said her daughter. The next day, she really went to the factory, and she did not refuse, but she had to work in the foundry. But difficulties never frightened Julia, so she agreed. Her mother was still working, so it was decided to give Sam to the kindergarten. Oh, how will he be there? Julia wailed in the evening. She hoped that her mother would sit with him. Well, agreed the mother, I'll talk at work. What about my pension? The very next day, Maria sat at the boss's office and told her how everything had turned out. Well, what are you, Maria? Did not work a little bit. The woman lamented. My grandson is dearer to me than all this. She circled the room. Okay, I won't keep you. I remember only good things. She signed her documents. Thank you very much. She stood up, bowed and walked away. The woman was released on early retirement, and now she sat with Sam, and Julia and Anthony went to work, as they wanted to, and back to the factory. I've been offered a pretty good position, the son-in-law told his mother-in-law and wife at the table that evening. That's to be expected, Julia shrugged. Now you have to ask for an apartment. You're not a simple laborer, you'll get one. She was sure of what she was saying, so she said so. A year, a second year, time flew quickly. At first, Anthony was embarrassed to ask his bosses for something, although Julia told him that they were entitled to an apartment. Living with his parents was already very hard. Not because anyone didn't like anyone, it was just cramped. So Anthony went. He talked to the boss, and he told him off for not coming earlier, and they were given a one-room apartment. What an evening. Everyone was happy with this news. And Julia had her own secrets. By now, Julia realized that she was pregnant for the second time. Now she was no longer worried. She was not afraid of anything. There were mom and dad, housing, kindergarten, so there were no bad thoughts. That day, she went to work as usual. Changed her clothes, took her desk. Julia, a colleague shouted to her. She wanted to ask her something. Yes, she looked back, and at that moment, she put her foot down awkwardly, and Julia started to fall. The woman struggled to hold on, realizing that she might hit the concrete floor. But it didn't help. She's going to kill herself. The one who had just called out to her ran up to her. Julia was lying on the floor of the shop, in a lot of pain. Sparks were still coming out of her eyes, and her stomach was tearing from the inside. You're bleeding, someone in the room said. An ambulance was called. Julia was taken away, and already in the hospital, she'd learned that she had lost the baby. She cried and didn't know how to go home. Why had she made such a mistake? Herself, no one to blame for it. Julia didn't understand how this could have happened. Even yesterday, everyone was enjoying life, it was good, and now there is nothing, or rather, no one. Enough, tears will not help the grief, her husband told her. Sam was running around. By now, he was already in kindergarten. Can I go before my mom? The woman raised her tearful eyes. Sure, why do you ask? He hugged her. Anthony was moving up the ladder. Now he was already in a very high position. Why don't you quit your job already if it's so hard for you? Anthony asked his wife. It had been 6 months since the incident, but she still couldn't calm down. No, it distracts me. Julia wasn't interested in anything. The most she paid attention to was her son and his studies. Okay, Anthony shrugged. Now he'd go to work and stay late into the evening. When he came back, his wife would throw tantrums. Does that make it easier for you to get through the hardships? He asked her. What hardships are you talking about? I feel bad. Samoy and I are waiting for you at home, and you were walking around in the middle of nowhere, she shouted. I see. He went to the kitchen. What do you understand? She followed him. Julia, exhale. Calm down, he said in a calm tone so as not to anger her even more. You lost a child too. Don't you feel bad now? She wasn't going to shut up. What am I supposed to do with all this? He didn't know. Somehow her husband was out again. He came very late, all dirty and drunk. Where? She wanted to ask a question and get hysterical again. But when she saw her husband's condition and his head was split open, she calmed down. It was the first time Julia had ever seen him like that. "What are you looking at?" "That's all," he said. "Where have you been?" She asked in a different tone of voice. Tears streamed from her eyes. She couldn't believe that this decent man she'd known for so long could do such a thing. But Anthony answered her nothing. He took off his coat and went to bed. In the morning, his wife didn't touch him. She tipped it around so Anthony wouldn't say anything. "And what are you sneaking around for?" He turned to the hallway where his wife was indeed sneaking around. "I'm sorry," she walked over to him. "What are you apologizing for?" He didn't understand. "And if you had killed yourself yesterday?" she cried. "It's okay though." He handed her a sandwich. "Yes, but I wouldn't have survived." She hugged her husband. For a while, the family settled down. Sam made his mother happy. He, like her, had done well in school, always helped his grandmother with the vegetable garden. He did everything at home too. Julia saw that he had a fondness for assembling various parts. She bought him a special constructor. The boy could take apart a radio and make a whole new toy out of its parts. Of course, it was not applicable anywhere, but it is also necessary to know how to do it. But when the son went to the 5th grade, the family again began something incomprehensible. "Where's Daddy?" he asked Julia. I don't know if it was an innocent question, but it made the woman so tense that she couldn't even breathe. "He didn't show up until this morning." "And what time is it?" Standing in the hallway was the wife. "I don't know," he hiccuped. "Look at you. You hold such a post, and you don't know what you're doing. Today was a day off. Everyone was at home." "What am I doing?" The man didn't understand. Now he could often stay late with ordinary factory workers just to avoid going home. There it was necessary to listen to the cries of his wife. "I'm going to my mom's." Julia began to pack. "Good riddance." He did not stop her. Those words came over the woman like a hurricane. She turned around and just stared at him. "You'll regret those words." She dropped everything and walked to the kitchen where Sam was having breakfast. "Mom, why are you cursing at Dad?" he asked her. "None of your business." The woman shouted at first and then regretted it. Every day she cried. She didn't know how to bring herself and her feelings in order. "You understand, it's not like I'm walking away from you, just sitting with the men," explained Anthony to her calmly in the evening. "And what? These men are dearer to me," again cried the wife. "Of course not." He kissed the top of her head. "Then why do we have everything like this?" She herself did not know the answer to this question. "Calm down, darling. Everything will be fine. You just know that." He got up and went to the kitchen to make tea. Julia looked after him. She was going to go see her mom, talk to her. "Hi." She walked into the house. "Why are you alone?" Maria asked her. "I want to talk." The daughter sat down on a stool. "About what?" The mother knew what the daughter would ask her, but she wanted to hear it from her. "I think Anthony has someone," she said, and then cried. "No," the woman hugged her. "How do you know?" She looked at her mother. "Evan, and I also had such a period. The man has a midlife crisis. Give him a break from you. He will settle down," the woman advised. "I can't." Julia continued to cry. "You'll see, a year, 2 years will pass, and you'll have everything the same." Maria stepped back and began to go through the closet. "A year, 2 years. I can't wait that long," Julia even shouted. "Then leave him," Mom shrugged. "No," Julia got to her feet. "Then don't cry, it won't make anyone feel better," Maria said quietly. "Mommy," she hugged the woman. "I understand. Calm down." She stroked her head. Julia returned home in a slightly uplifted mood. She went into the kitchen and started cooking. "What smells so good?" Her husband came in. "Here, I've made dinner." Julia's behavior had changed. And indeed, as she changed, Anthony began to change too. Things were starting to settle down in the family. Sam went to school. He was already in high school. One day, his father talked to him about his career choice. "I don't know, I'm gonna be a banker," he said. "Where did that come from?" His father was very surprised. "They're all the rage now. Sam wasn't a stupid kid." "Well, you have to finish your studies first, and then you'll see." His father was proud that he had such a young man growing up. "Do you think he'll make it to the 10th, or will he leave at the 8th? He asked his wife. "I don't know, but I'd advise him to make it to the 10th. Julia turned to her husband. "We need to talk to him about it, but some other time." He looked back and saw that his son was going somewhere. "I'm going for a walk," Sam shouted, and left. Time was running very fast. Julia realized that old age was creeping up, but she tried not to think about it. Her son had already graduated from high school, standing all handsome next to his classmates. And she still remembered the smell of that new certificate, which she was handed at school. All the family was here, as well as close acquaintances. "Sam's all grown up," Grandma said, looking at her grandson. "Yes, he will soon get married, fly away from the nest, and there is no telling what kind of daughter-in-law he will have," Julia said sadly, looking at the graduates. Sam, as he wanted, entered the financial technical school. He began to study. Everything was good. Nothing but a deal. "Hello, everyone." Julia entered her mother's house. No one answered her in return. "Where are you all?" She went through the rooms. Her mother was lying on the floor looking at her. "Ambulance. Urgently, come, the woman is bad." She shouted into the phone. The car came quickly. The grandmother was taken away. She never returned home. "Mom, how could it be?" The coffin stood in the middle of the room. "Don't cry, daughter," her father came to her. "Why didn't she tell me earlier that she wasn't feeling well?" Julia was crying and couldn't stop. "She didn't tell me anything either," even sat down. Everyone gathered to say goodbye to Maria. She was a good woman and hard worker, and she had medals for working on the home front during the war. "I didn't save her," Julia sobbed in the cemetery. "Everything comes to an end," her husband told her. They had a wake and then drove home, and Julia's depression began to linger again. But now she didn't yell at anyone. She didn't do anything. She just sat and stared at one point. "This can't go on," Anthony yelled. He had problems too. The factory had stopped paying wages. There was some confusion. 6 months after her mother's funeral, Maria's neighbors and acquaintances gathered to remember her. "Where's Evan?" Betty asked. "Really, where's Dad?" Julia looked around. She went into the kitchen of the dining room where they were and dialed their home phone number. "Dad, where are you?" she asked when he picked up the phone. A hoarse breathing sounded in response. "I'm coming." She hung up, but there was no way to go. The car that had brought them here had already left. So Julia ran. She prayed to God that she would make it in time. She ran into the house, and her father was lying on the chairs in the kitchen. "Daddy," she ran to him. "I called an ambulance," he muttered. "What was it?" The woman didn't understand. She thrashed around the kitchen, not knowing what to grab onto. The paramedics arrived and took Evan to the hospital. For a week, they fought for his life, but nothing could be done. "That's it, I'm an orphan." Julia felt sorry for herself at the cemetery. Anthony did not come this time. He was also a little sick and lay in bed. "How am I supposed to deal with all this?" She came home. "Julia, don't exacerbate the situation. I'm already sick. Give me some pills, please," Anthony asked. Perestroika came. Everything began to change, including the factory where Anthony worked. Julia was lucky. She was already retired. "I can't take it anymore." Anthony came home, his face red. "Are you sick?" Julia was alert. "No, I feel very bad," shouted the man. Julia went to the kitchen to get him some water. "And what are you silent for?" She returned, the glass falling out of her hands. She rushed into the room. And again the ambulance, the hospital. No, please, not again. She sat by his bedside and held his hand. I'm sorry, he whispered with just his lips. No, don't leave me. It had been 8 months since Evan had been gone, and a little over a year since Mom. Love, he lay under an IV. Anthony was gone 3 days later. Julia walked behind the casket. She didn't cry because the tears just weren't there. She'd already cried them all. Hold on, someone told her. But there was nothing to hold on to, nothing. She was like a sleepwalker, seemingly awake, but in fact she was so deep inside herself that she didn't realize it. Mom, what's wrong? My son came home from school. Nothing. Why didn't you come to your father's funeral? She asked him. I couldn't. It was practice. He was undressing. We have a house that needs to be stoked at least once a week, or everything will rot, Julia said. So stuff it, Sam sassed her back. How do you talk to your mother? But she didn't even have the emotion to yell. That's it, go, he waved her off. When Sam left, Julia decided to move into her mother's house. She did. Nothing would happen to the apartment, but the house might. The son called. Hello, she picked up the phone. Mom, I need money, he told her. How much? She waited. Not much, he was kind of shy. And how will I send it to you? She asked. If you give it to me, I'll come, the guy was happy. He was at her place in a couple hours. Why are you here? He couldn't find her at home and decided to look for her at her grandmother's. I moved, she said. Okay, give me the money and I'm off. He held out his hand. How much? The woman asked again. As much as there is. He himself did not know how much he might need this time. No, I can't give you that much. Julia shook her head. She realized he wasn't in for a serious case. The woman took a few bills and held them out to Sam. It's not enough. He wrinkled his nose. I could add as much more, she returned, and did the same. Okay. So that left the disgruntled son. Sam had long been addicted to slot machines. Now there just wasn't an hour that went by that he didn't play, and he needed money to do it. The guy was running various schemes, but he still didn't have enough. Wait, his mother stopped him. Have you been drinking? Drunk or not drunk? What do you care? He ripped his arm out and walked out of the house. She couldn't believe she'd lost him. What had happened to him? He'd been such a good guy before all this happened. But she was in for an even bigger blow. She couldn't even think that such a thing could happen in her life. Not even a week after she gave her son the money, he showed up again. This time it was obvious to the naked eye that he had been drinking somewhere. Mother, give me the money, he shouted. Why aren't you at school? She came out and shouted at him. I haven't studied for a long time, he laughed. Well, undress and go to bed. She wanted to pull off his jacket, but the guy pushed the woman away. So hard that she flew back to the stove and bumped her head. It was the first time anyone had ever touched her. Julia regained consciousness. She didn't understand anything. She was dizzy. She got up from the floor, got up, drank some water, looked into the room. Sam was lying on the couch sleeping in his clothes. She decided not to touch him yet, but come tomorrow, he would have to listen to her. Julia touched the back of her head. Everything hurt there. She went into the room and lay down too, having taken some pills beforehand. Why don't we have anything to eat in the house? Sam spoke very impertinently. First of all, good morning. Julia opened her eyes. Yeah, he was rummaging through the lockers. What are you looking for? Julia asked, thinking it was money. You got anything to drink? He turned to her. Sam, son, what happened to you? She went over to him. Don't touch me. He pulled her hands away like it wasn't her son at all. What's going on? She put her hand over her mouth and cried. Give me a drink. He stood over her. Over there, she pointed her finger at the cellar. Oh wow, Sam went down there. Even liked to experiment. He brewed moonshine with everything he could get his hands on, and also made various liquors and tinctures. So Julia knew there was something in the cellar. Get out. His mother called him back when almost an hour of time had passed. No one answered her. She peeked in. The boy was just sleeping there already, apparently having had too much to drink. Julia gathered herself and went outside. She didn't understand at all what was going on in her life and more. When she came back, she saw that there were a lot of splinters on the floor. She looked into the cellar. There was no one there and a good part of the alcohol too. And the shards must have taken the appetizer too. Julia sat down on a chair and cried. It seemed to her that tears were the norm of her life, though they were no longer. The woman knew that there was a club for veterans or pensioners in the local DK. She decided that she would go there because she was bored alone. So she did. There were many acquaintances there, and they all did various things together. They sang, sewed, knitted, painted. They even had art exhibits. You know, Julia, we have one more job to do, Caroline once told her. Yes, what was it? She wanted to know. We take care of stray dogs, her friend told her. I love dogs, the woman smiled. Then tomorrow take some treats for him, and we'll go there, Carolina asked her. I will? Julia's mood even lifted. The dogs were adorable. There were many of them, all in the same territory. One day, a boss offered us his garden, and we didn't refuse. We made a fence with our own hands. We have men, she showed her class. What a wonderful idea, she smiled. Come on, don't be afraid. Caroline led her by the hand. I'm not afraid. Julia stepped over the threshold. This is Barbos, this is Sharik, and this is Mokhtar. The woman began to list the names of the dogs. Julia saw one that was sitting apart from everyone. She felt so sorry for her that she went straight to her. Why are you sitting here alone, little one? She sat down beside the dog. She is deaf, Caroline told her. I see. Why is she sitting here so quietly? The woman stroked and stroked her. The dog felt the affection and began to pet the woman. Do you want to take her home? Suggested her friend. Oh, I'm not ready for such feats yet. Julia smiled modestly. They were returning home, and it was calm in their hearts. Julia did not expect anything good from this life. Ma hi, just she opened the gate and heard her son's voice. It had been a whole year since she'd last seen him. Scared her, she jumped up. What's so scary? He smiled. Julia noticed his mouth was missing a couple teeth. Sam, how long do we have to wait here? A woman's voice came from behind the house. A woman, Julia couldn't even tell how old she was. She looked like she had a lot of age on her face. Hello, Julia said sternly. Oh, hello. Her son's friend was hugging. Sam, keep your companion quiet. The woman stepped back. And we're coming to live with you, he grumbled. Come on in. She opened the door. Everyone went inside. Why are you so unfriendly? The son looked at his mother's back. Explain to me, who is that? She pointed her finger at the woman. My future wife, he said. I was wondering, wife, how old are you? Julia asked. 40, she replied almost proudly. And him? The mother pointed at her son. That's for you to know, she laughed. Selena, stop it, Sam stopped her. And what? You're going to sit here and drink, and I'm going to hump you? Julia asked both of them. What's the big deal? Sam's changed a lot since then. Nothing, that's not gonna happen, the woman shouted. And we're not asking you if it will or not. He got up and walked towards the cellar. Stop, she asked her son. And if you don't? He didn't turn around and kept walking. Then I'll stop you myself, she motioned to him. Try it, he laughed. Julia stopped. She remembered the last time he'd pushed her away. She didn't want to take any more chances. Times had been hard in the country, and here, it was like everything was fine, except for that companion her son had brought, Celine. Why are the dishes dirty again? Julia came back from the cultural center and told Selena. Take it and wash it. She sat at the table and didn't even look at her. How dare you talk to me like that? The woman was indignant. Stop yelling at my fiancé. Sam entered the kitchen. Fiancé, Julia smirked. She put up with all the antics of that girl and her son. They've been living with her for 2 years, and it was only getting worse. If you don't get out of here now, I'm going to have to take action, Julia threatens Selena. That can only be decided by Sam, the latter said. Let's see who decides. Julia couldn't take it anymore. She spent most of her time with her acquaintances at the club or with her dogs. She was doing everything she could to get Selena out of the house. At first, Sam wouldn't give up, defended her, but then she started to grow cold to Selena, and at some point, she just got up and walked away, apparently sick of it. Did you get it? Sam took a swing at his mom. Son, she put her hands forward, covering her face. But Sam couldn't see or understand anything. The woman reached for the phone. She called an ambulance. They arrived and were horrified at the sight of the woman, but she didn't report her son. For a whole month, she lay in the hospital. Friends visited her, most often Caroline. How did it happen? Her friend asked her. I don't know. I've been living like this for a long time. I didn't want to make a mess. But you see how it turned out, cried Julia. Yes, you have a story. The woman shook her head. Julia was afraid to go home. She realized that nothing would change. Son, she came home from the hospital. Oh, I'm awake. He was in the kitchen. Look at you. What do you look like now? You're only 30 years old. And what have you accomplished in life? She was talking to him, and everything was shaking inside. What do you want from me? He asked. Listen, we have an apartment in the city. Maybe you move there, asked his mother. What? You want to get rid of me? He stood over her. No, of course not. What are you talking about? She waved her hands. That's all. I have other plans for the apartment. He sat back down. Julia stopped saying anything to him. She could see her son going downhill, but there was nothing she could do about it. He continued to drink and gamble. Of course, he took money for everything from his mother. She tolerated and kept quiet because there was nothing she could do. Julia started to get a lot of pain, mostly in her head. She felt all kinds of pressure. She could feel the weather, and she felt sick all the time. Julia, do you want to go to the dogs? Caroline came to see her. Hello, who are you? She told her. What are you? Friend. It's me, Carolina, surprised the guest. Ah, Carolina. They were standing in the yard of Julie's house. Didn't you recognize me? The woman asked. No, of course I recognized her. Julia waved her off. She really did realize now. Who was in front of her? Often Julia would go out to get groceries at the store and then not realize what city she was in or where she was. Then she would get to a bus stop and sit there until someone she knew found her. Her son didn't care about any of this. He acted like a pig, telling everyone that he was moving his mother back to the apartment where he would feel better with her. Caroline defended Julia. She's here with her friends and her dogs, she told Sam. Your dogs aren't going anywhere. He wouldn't let her in the house. They moved. There were few acquaintances in that neighborhood. Julia, when she was mentally alert, realized she had some kind of illness. She decided to see a doctor. But when she left the house and walked some meters, she realized that she was lost again. She sat down on a bench and some vagrant girl came to her. Mother, give her some money for bread, she asked her. It's all at home. I wish I knew where I live. She was sitting in her own yard, but she didn't realize it. Oh, you're not feeling well at all. The woman got up and walked away from her. Sam stood at the window. He saw it all. This time he felt sorry for his mom, went out into the yard and took her home. So she also resisted that she would not go anywhere with a stranger. Hello. He came with his mother to the hospital. She needs to be checked out. Well, the doctor saw the condition of the young man, looked at him judgmentally, but taking care of his mother gave him a chance to rehabilitate himself. Julia had to go to the hospital. Sam drove her there. It's not gonna get better. It's only gonna get worse, the doctor told him. Right. So Sam took his mother home after she was discharged. Sometimes Caroline came to visit, and she tried to convince Sam to bring her back to her parents' house. But he wouldn't budge. And what did he want with the apartment? Julia managed to get away while her son was away, wherever she went. Once she spent a couple nights with vagrants, but by some miracle, they always brought her back, or she remembered where she lived. "Sam, I want to go home," Julia said one morning. "No house, lie here," he told her gruffly. The woman waited for him to leave, got ready, and went herself. While she was in her mind, wrote everything down on a piece of paper, where she wanted to go and where she was from. And it worked. She got there. "Julia, how can you be alone?" Caroline walked towards her. "Who are you?" The woman looked at her. "What did he do to you? He didn't spare your own mother." Carolina began to cry. She took Julia under her arm, and so they went to the dogs, and then returned to the club. Julia sang songs with everyone together. It was so strange. She didn't recognize anyone, but she remembered the songs. Friends and acquaintances wondered. And then she sat in the house for a long time, reviewing the album, but she didn't recognize many people there. Sam thought she'd gone somewhere else again. He didn't think about it at first, but when his mother was gone for almost a week, he got worried. "Sam, it's Caroline," the woman called him. "I didn't do anything." He immediately started to justify himself. "I know, that's why I'm calling. Your mom is here in her house," she informed him and hung up. It was impossible to live like this. Sam could not without his mother's money. He went to her. The son realized that if his mother died, he would need something to bury her with. He was in debt, but he couldn't do anything while she was alive. Julia became ill at night. He called an ambulance. The doctors took a long time to arrive, but arrived, and the woman was back in the hospital. The attacks were frequent. Sometimes it got to the point where it was every 2 months. "Your mom's not well," the neighbors told him. "Well, leave her alone. I'll take her to the city, to the hospital." So that everyone would leave her alone, they moved back to the city. By now, Julia didn't remember or recognize anything at all. Sam could have taken her outside and left, and come back hours later, and she'd still be sitting there on the bench. "Let's go." He took her under his arm. "How's Julia's health?" Caroline called and asked. "You know she's gone again. Isn't she at your place?" "I've been looking for her," Sam said cheekily, his mother sitting in the kitchen. "What are you talking about? You should report her," the woman said. The man even thought of putting her in a nursing home, but then he'd lose everything. Then he had an idea. He spent a year answering her friends and everyone who called that her mother was out somewhere and he could not find her. Then he'd call back and say he'd found her. Everyone was happy that he cared about his son, even though he was such a son. Caroline was the only one who knew the truth, that all he wanted from his mother was money. He'd been hatching this plan for years. His mother had fallen ill, but she received her pension every month. Sam realized she didn't have much time left, so he had no better idea than to take her somewhere himself. "Come on, let's go," he said, but she just looked at him and didn't say anything. He took her out of the driveway. He knew that the local dump is inhabited by vagrants and took my mom there. There was no one there, but the stuff was still there, which meant someone would still come back. He put mommy there, turned around and walked away. Didn't even look back once. "Oh, we got company. 2 men and a woman are back. Where'd she come from?" One of them asked. He was shaking so much he was going in different directions. "I don't know. She must have come by herself. You see her sitting there, dazed," said the woman. They searched Julia's pockets and found some bills and coins. "Come on, Grandma, let's go." The tramp lifted her up. They went to the heating main, where they spent the night. "Why did you take it with you?" Her companion asked her. "What if someone loses it and we say we found it in a garbage dump?" "Who are you?" Julia asked them. "Look, she can also talk," laughed the woman. Caroline? Grandma looked at her questioningly. Do you want me to be Carolina? She pulled some food out of the bags. Should we take her to the hospital? The one who was shaking asked. Yeah, we'll be admitted there. The woman shook her head. Where to then? They were all drunk, so their heads weren't working very well. Caroline called Sam, but he didn't answer, disappeared altogether, in an unknown direction. She went to his apartment, went inside, but she couldn't find anyone. The woman was very worried about her friend. Look, she's not well. One of the vagrants pointed his finger at Julia, but the woman couldn't answer him. He called an ambulance. They came and took the body away. When they took her to the morgue, the doctor who admitted her recognized her. I got a call about this woman. I think her name is Julia, he said. She didn't have any documents on her, the young man said. I'll be right back. The man went up to the office. He was looking for a piece of paper with Carolina's phone number written on it, and he found it. Carolina, hello. He began the conversation. Good evening, she was excited. Julia, I think you were looking for her, he asked. Yes, has something come to light? The woman became even more agitated. Come, the doctor said. She didn't think for a minute, dropped everything and went where she was invited. The woman ran into the lobby of the hospital, and the doctor who had called her the other day was waiting for her. Hello, it's me, I called you. She ran up to him and couldn't catch her breath. Yes, I already realized that from the look of you, he told her and pointed to the exit. They walked into the morgue building. Caroline immediately realized everything. She saw her friend's body, her eyes immediately stinging with tears. Carolina turned away. She didn't want to see her like that. Tell me, where did you find her? She asked. I've been both at home and in the apartment. She was nowhere to be found. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. He looked at her sadly. Tell me, I can believe everything already. Caroline knew Sam could do as he saw fit. She was found by a man near the garbage cans. She was already dead, the doctor muttered and lowered his eyes to the ground. Oh my God. The woman clutched her head. I knew it would come to this. Do you know something? We should report it then, he told her. No, it's all useless. She shook her head in the negative, because she assumed who did it and why. Why? The doctor asked and fell silent. He seemed to realize what was the reason for this whole circus. Yes, I see you guessed it. Julia hadn't been feeling well lately. She didn't understand anything and didn't know where she was, nor did she recognize anyone. So she would leave the house and just get lost in the street. Well, if acquaintances saw her, they would bring her back home. But if none of them were around, she stayed on the street, the woman said and said. She had a son, didn't she? The doctor clarified. Yes, she did. But who was he, did you see? The woman asked dismissively. Of course I saw. He was the one who'd brought his mother to me, the man told her. Of course, I can't prove anything, but I think he's the one who brought her to this state. She put her whole life into him, and he just threw her in the trash, Caroline said. Will you take care of her body? The doctor asked. Of course, as soon as you tell me, I'll come and get her. I live where her parents used to live. I'll bury her with them. At least now she will be at ease near her relatives. She cried and could not calm down. There is no need to be upset. Go home, rest, and we will notify you. He even slightly embraced her. The woman went home. She wanted so much to go to the House of Culture, where they all gathered together. But it was already late today, so she decided to postpone everything for tomorrow. The next day, Caroline told everyone what had happened. Everyone was shocked. Preparations began for Julia's dignified burial. She was brought in, not brought into the house. The farewell was held in the House of Culture. Now wait, said a friend, as if she remembered something. While the body was still inside the building, she tried to make it. The woman got out of there and ran to Julia's house. She wanted to take the icon she had been walking around with lately and put it with her. Caroline ran up to the gate, pushed it open. but it wouldn't budge. She didn't realize anything. The house was locked from the inside. The woman started pounding on the window, but no one opened it. "Sam, open up or I'll break the windows," she shouted. At that moment, a man's shaggy head appeared in the window, nodding at her, saying, "What do you want?" "Open up," I said. She wasn't going to back down. There was a creak of the bolt, and the door opened. At the same moment, Caroline attacked Sam. "Look what you did to your mother. You threw her in the dumpster, and there she died. What is she, a dog? Dogs are better than dogs." The woman started yelling. "Why are you snapping at me?" "I don't know where she went. I couldn't find her." He started to justify himself. "Where were you looking for her? Where were you?" "I was looking for you. I had to. I found her. But well, my mother still has the apartment and the house. It should all go to me. I need to do the documents." He said. It was clear that last night he had not just spent the evening. "What a scoundrel you are. You killed your mother just for the inheritance," she told him with indignation. "What do you know?" He wanted to insult her, but Caroline was not his mother. She could answer him. The woman packed up, and they drove off. "Hello." The woman entered the office. "I'm here to bring a numbskull who wants to inherit from his mother." Everyone in this town knew the young man because he was the only one here. Yes, Caroline. Come in," he answered her. The woman was not surprised at all because she used to work at the school. Many people knew her. They sat down on chairs on opposite sides of the table. The young man leafed through some papers, then smiled and took out a folder with Julia's name written on it. "Are you ready to hear the will?" the notary said, and looked at Sam. "What will?" He couldn't understand. "The ordinary one your mother left," the notary told him. "My mother left a will." Sam couldn't believe it. She was so pious. She wouldn't do that. "Well, that's what you think. But I had her years ago, and all the papers are intact," the lawyer showed him. The woman had warned him then that there might be a case like this. Sam's eyes went wide. What kind of will was there to talk about? His mother hadn't been herself for so many years. He'd kept her with him on purpose so she couldn't go out, sign or write anything. And here it was, when she had time, and where he let it slip out of his sight. So, the young man began to read out. Julia had bequeathed her apartment in the city to a dog shelter. They can sell it and use the money to make things even better for the dogs. And here's the house she's giving to the Veterans Club, so they can set up a base where everyone can meet. That can't be right. Caroline clutched her head and smiled. She looked angrily at Sam. "And what? There's not a word about me in there." "How did you all hear?" "No." He turned the paper to the man. "Fuck you. It's all your fault." He flicked the papers that were lying on the table. Then he kicked the chair where no one was sitting. "I don't need to smash the furniture here," the man behind the desk told him. "Fuck you." The man couldn't catch his breath. "And don't be so nervous," the notary told him. "Fuck off. I'll burn this house down so no one else can have it." Sam shouted one last time. "He won't burn it down," the woman reassured the lawyer. She sat coldly and smiled as if she knew Julia had planned it that way. "Were you aware of the will?" the young man asked her. He was sure that she had warned her friend. "Of course not," she stared at him. She herself was stunned by everything she had just heard. "Then your friend found me. I was just starting out. She tearfully begged me to let her write all this. I wondered why she wanted it done so quickly. And Julia told me that her son wasn't what she'd raised him to be. He started drinking, gambling, taking all her money, yelling at her and attacking her. She couldn't tolerate such an attitude towards herself, so she couldn't stand it and wanted to find justice. And after the hospital, things took a bad turn. Julia left a letter for you here." He held out an envelope that was yellowed from time, but looked so familiar. Caroline signed the necessary documents, stood up, thanked the notary, and left the office. She clutched the precious envelope tightly to her chest. The woman hurried home to read what her friend had left her. No sooner had she entered than she sat down in a chair and began to unseal the letter. "Hello, dear Caroline. I don't know if I'm still alive or not, but if you took this letter to the notary, in all likelihood you're not anymore. Now, you and I may not know each other very well, but I'm sure we'll continue to talk. I just cherish it so much. I want to tell you that I'm giving all of my possessions to you. I won't need it when I die. I'm not taking it with me to the next world, and I don't want to leave it to Sam. He used to be such a good boy. Everybody used to praise him. But after his father died, he turned into the devil. I'm scared of him, and the only place I can get my mind off him is at the club with the dogs. So don't hold a grudge. Use it and remember me, your Julia." The woman sat reading and crying. "What I'm going to tell you now, you won't believe me." She gathered everyone in the club again. "Don't languish, it was interesting people. Julia left us a whole inheritance, and she told what and how it happened today at the notary's office. That's what he should do," one of them said. "He'd drink it all away, and we'd use it," others echoed him. "We didn't wait for anything. The apartment, as Julia wanted, was sold. With the money that she received for it, bought building materials, and the work began. Finally, the dogs will be warm in the winter," Caroline said. "Yes, they are freezing," confirmed the man who had been looking at her for a long time. "What are we going to do with the house?" A woman who had recently joined the coalition came up. "What Julia wanted. We'll set up our headquarters there. Now we'll have a place to gather to sing songs and do everything else," Caroline chirped cheerfully. It was done that way. Now at the dog shelter, in the hall hangs a picture of Julia as the main sponsor of this project. There are also many of her belongings and photos in the house, so that no one forgets her.